Todd Monken sat down for a live broadcast yesterday and said everything an NFL head coach is supposed to say about an ongoing quarterback competition. He talked about evaluation, about process, about letting things develop naturally before making decisions that carry franchise-level consequences. Every word was professionally calibrated. Every answer landed exactly where a careful organization would want it to land. And if you were listening only to the surface of what he said, you probably walked away thinking the Cleveland quarterback situation remains genuinely open. I listened to the same broadcast. I heard something completely different. Because there is a language that experienced NFL coaches have developed over careers of managing sensitive personnel situations in public forums, and once you understand how it works, the official statements stop being the story. What lives underneath them becomes the story. And what lived underneath every answer Monken gave yesterday was not ambiguous once you knew what to look for. The quarterback competition in Cleveland is over. Not on paper, not in the press releases, not in the carefully managed language that will continue flowing from that organization until the formal announcement is ready to be delivered. But in reality, inside that building, in the film rooms and the coaching conversations and the daily operational decisions that determine how these things actually resolve, it is over. Dylan Gabriel's time in Cleveland has reached its conclusion. Deshaun Watson's body has effectively made the decision his performance could never fully make on its own. And Shedeur Sanders did not simply win a competition. He outlasted an entire organizational environment that was not originally built to support his success, rebuilt himself inside it, and emerged as the only answer the evidence genuinely supports. The official announcement is a formality. Let me walk you through exactly why I know that. Start with Gabriel, because the most revealing moment in Monken's entire broadcast was not anything he said about Shedeur or Watson. It was the quality of his language when Gabriel's name entered the conversation. Think about how coaches naturally talk when they are discussing a player they genuinely believe in. They generate specificity without effort. They reference something they watched in practice last Tuesday. They mention a specific throw, a specific decision under pressure, a moment in film study where something clicked and the player showed them a dimension they had not fully seen before. That specificity is the organic language of real investment. It is what genuine belief sounds like when a coach has been watching a player closely enough to form real opinions about his development. None of that existed when Gabriel came up. What existed was flat, technically professional, carefully managed language that coaches deploy when they are discussing a situation they have already resolved internally but cannot yet address publicly. Gabriel was not discussed like a competitor still fighting for a job. He was discussed like a transaction the organization is already moving toward at the right moment. And in professional football, when a head coach stops generating invested specific language around a quarterback's future, that quarterback's days in that building are numbered in a way no official statement has yet confirmed. The trade conversation around Gabriel is not approaching. It is already happening in the background while the public language stays carefully neutral. And the implications of his departure extend beyond simple roster arithmetic. Gabriel's presence in that quarterback room has carried a specific kind of weight all offseason that every coach in that building has had to manage regardless of whether it appeared in any public reporting. The frustration he carried into this competition, the feeling of being overlooked and evaluated against a predetermined outcome, created a low-level friction in that shared space that does not stay contained to the individual experiencing it. That kind of tension changes the atmosphere of a room in ways that are difficult to quantify but entirely real in their effect. It divides coaching attention between football development and interpersonal management. Remove that friction and the room reorganizes around something cleaner. The energy that was going toward managing competing storylines gets redirected entirely toward building an offense. In a quarterback room trying to establish the foundation of a new offensive identity under a new head coach, that shift matters more than people tend to credit. Now Watson, because this is the part of Monken's broadcast that I think will generate the most serious conversation once people slow down and process what was actually being communicated. Monken was careful when Watson's name came up. Deliberately, specifically careful in a way that reveals exactly how much thought went into every word before it left his mouth. He acknowledged Watson's football knowledge. He spoke genuinely about the value of veteran experience in the room. All of that was present and none of it was insincere. But here is what was also present. Running beneath those acknowledgments like a current you could only detect if you were listening for it. There was no confidence expressed, even implicitly, that Watson can carry the full weight of an NFL season. Not stated directly because Monken is too experienced to say something that exposed about a player still on his roster. But the absence of that confidence was audible in how Watson's role kept being framed, in the careful avoidance of any language positioning him as the clear answer for 17 games and a potential playoff run. The honest reality is one this organization has already worked through privately. The injury history is real. The physical uncertainty is real. Building an entire offensive identity around a quarterback when the medical reality of his recent years creates genuine questions about full season availability is a risk no coaching staff with a legitimate alternative would rationally accept. You cannot install a sophisticated system, develop the chemistry between quarterback and receivers that takes months of real competitive work to build, and invest all of that organizational energy into a player whose December availability cannot be confidently projected. The math does not work when you run it all the way through. Monken has run it. The front office has run it, and the way Watson was discussed yesterday, valued and respected but quietly repositioned away from the role of franchise-carrying starter, confirmed the calculation has been completed and accepted. What Watson can genuinely be for this team is valuable if his orientation is right. Everything he accumulated as a starting quarterback operating at a high level, the defensive structures he has read under real competitive pressure, the situational intelligence that only develops through actual consequences, the psychological knowledge of managing an offense when everything around you is breaking down, all of that becomes available to Shedeur on the sideline every week if Watson chooses to make it available. In the film room, in conversations between series, when a young quarterback needs someone who has already been through the hardest version of what he is experiencing to tell him what he is seeing is manageable and here is how you handle it. Watson in that supporting role, genuinely invested rather than quietly resentful, is one of the more substantive backup situations available in the league. The signals coming out of Cleveland suggest that conversation has already happened and the right answer came back, so strip everything else away. Move Gabriel toward the exit and clear the friction. Reposition Watson as veteran intelligence rather than primary starter. And what remains is exactly what the evidence has been pointing toward for months. Shedeur Sanders at the top of the depth chart, alone, with the full organizational commitment finally aligning behind him. Not there by default. Not there because everyone around him failed dramatically enough to create a vacancy. There because he showed up every single day and built an undeniable case through the accumulated weight of his preparation, his composure, and his consistent refusal to let the noise around him become the story of his own development. How Shedeur won this matters as much as the fact that he won it. He did not win it through spectacle. He did not manufacture dramatic moments or force the kind of attention that generates headlines and creates long-term complications. He won it the way quarterbacks who go on to have durable careers always win jobs that were not simply handed to them, by showing up when showing up was harder than it looked, by handling uncomfortable situations with a maturity that communicated something to the coaching staff that no individual practice throw could communicate on its own. He told them, through the consistency of his daily behavior across months of genuine organizational pressure, that when the season gets difficult, and NFL seasons always get difficult, he is not going to be the source of the problem. He is going to be the answer. That specific message is what moves a head coach toward real commitment more reliably than any physical attribute. The message that says, when this gets hard, you can trust me. Shedeur sent it through every available channel all offseason. Monken received it. Yesterday's broadcast was the first genuinely public confirmation that it landed. Now look at what is being constructed around Shedeur, because the developmental environment being assembled in Cleveland is one of the more thoughtful structures built around a young quarterback in recent years. Spencer Fano, coming in at the 9th overall pick, was a declaration of organizational intent expressed through the most expensive currency a franchise possesses. You do not spend a top 10 pick on an offensive tackle unless the quarterback you are protecting is worth that level of investment. Fano is a ready-now elite pass protector who surrendered essentially nothing in college across hundreds of competitive reps. Quick feet, natural balance, the football intelligence to handle complex pass rush games without getting systematically exploited. What he gives Shedeur is what young quarterbacks desperately need and rarely receive early in their careers: real, consistent time in the pocket. The kind of time that allows a developing passer to actually execute his full progression, find his second and third reads, and make the accumulating confident decisions that build real cognitive foundation rather than the compressed, panicked decisions that build compensatory habits taking years to correct. Casey Conception in the receiving corps adds a layer that sharpens the developmental picture significantly. A route runner who creates genuine separation against tight man coverage is specifically valuable for a young quarterback because man coverage is the structure that most consistently hurts developing passers. Winning against man requires a quarterback to trust his receiver to win the route and commit to the throw before the separation is fully visible. Pair a quarterback who processes defensive intentions quickly with a receiver who reliably wins against pressed coverage, and you create a combination that forces defensive coordinators to account for it in ways that open everything else in the offense around it. The connection Shedeur and Conception developed through training camp will be one of the genuinely interesting developmental storylines of the entire 2026 season. Denzel Boston outside adds a completely different profile and a completely different coverage problem, and the compounding effect of receivers demanding different defensive responses is what separates a functional core from a genuine offensive weapon. Underneath all of it sits a defensive foundation that finished top 5 in the league last season and has no structural reason to decline significantly. That defense keeps Cleveland in games while the offense finds its rhythm, which is the single most important thing a defense can do for a young quarterback in his first full season as a starter. It removes the pressure of needing to be perfect immediately, which is precisely the pressure that breaks young quarterbacks before their development can reach what their talent genuinely supports. Here is where everything lands, and the summary is simpler than the noise around it has made it appear. 3 quarterbacks entered this process. One is being moved because the head coach's language has already communicated he does not belong in the future being constructed in Cleveland. One is being repositioned because the honest assessment of his physical situation makes him an asset in a supporting role and a liability as a primary starter. And one has been building his case quietly, consistently, and relentlessly every single day while everything around him shifted and eventually cleared a direct path to the top of the depth chart. Monken said yesterday the decision has not been made. What he actually communicated, in the texture of every answer and every careful pause and every piece of language deliberately chosen or deliberately avoided, is that the decision has been living in that building for weeks, growing more certain with every practice and every film session and every conversation between a head coach and a quarterback who keeps showing him the same thing with the same consistency. The announcement is the formality. The era has already begun.